The channel at night has its own kind of silence. Not an empty silence, but something deeper, as if the water itself is listening. You're standing on the deck of a Royal Navy search ship in April 1951. The air is calm, almost unnervingly so. A submarine should have surfaced hours ago. It didn't. Then the noise begins. A faint metallic tap rises from the headphones. A pause, another tap. Then a pattern, just clear enough that the radio operators start marking it down. An HMS ambush reports Morse code that operators recognize at once. We are trapped on the bottom. But here's the problem. The submarine that should have sent that message was already gone. In this episode, we'll investigate the extraordinary events surrounding HMS Affray, the tapping Hurd after she vanished, and the inquiry that tried to explain what had happened in the channel that night. And if you love historical mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Before we continue, it's worth acknowledging something about submarines themselves. I stepped onto the HMAS Onslow at the National Maritime Museum in Sydney a few years ago, and I didn't last very long. Just getting into it seemed impossible, and the narrow corridors, the low ceilings, the solid weight of steel pressing in from every side. It's not a space you forget in a hurry. It actually makes you realise how professional and courageous submarine crews are. And of course, during the Titan submersible disaster in 2023, the world waited for updates with that quiet sense of dread. That fear is instinctive and human, and I think it makes events like this feel even more poignant. So back to the story. HMS Affray sailed from Portsmouth on the evening of the 16th of April 1951 with 75 men aboard. Her regular crew, they were engineering officers under training, and a four-man special boat service detachment. Only 26 of those men were part of Affray's regular crew. The rest were trainees and last-minute replacements brought in after a confusion over Easter leave. She was commanded by Lieutenant Commander John Blackburn, an experienced officer who had already arranged for Affray to go into dock at the end of the exercise because of ongoing battery problems. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested danger, but it gives us a sense of the boat's condition as she left Portsmouth that night. Their task was straightforward. They were conducting exercise Spring Train, which was a simulated war patrol. Affray dived at 21:15 that night. She was due to report to position the next morning, but no signal came. By midday, the Admiralty initiated Operation Subsmash procedures, the formal search for a missing submarine. Mysteriously, a red flare was reportedly seen off Alderney overnight, but no vessel ever confirmed it. It was one of those details that never found a place to settle in the official record. By next morning, there was still nothing on the surface. The search began immediately. The weather was unusually clear, so visibility was excellent. Ships, submarines, and aircraft swept hundreds of square miles of the channel. Other submarines joined in, flying large white flags so they couldn't be mistaken for a fray. But nothing appeared, and this is unusual. There was no debris, oil slicks, and no buoys. Search ships chased multiple promising Aztec contacts, but the seabird south of the Isle of Wight and around the Channel Islands is crowded with wrecks from 2 world wars. Every promising shape turned into something else. They were fragments of forgotten ships, old steel twisted by decades underwater. Meanwhile, the tapping continued, faint and broken, structured just enough that no one could quite ignore it. It was the strangest part of those early days. The sea seemed full of signals, but none of them led anywhere. For a submarine that seemed to vanish without a trace, the channel suddenly felt alive with echoes. Affray belonged to the Amphion class, the Royal Navy's late war design intended for long-range operations in the Pacific. On paper, she was everything a modern submarine was supposed to be: a welded hull, streamlined casing, refrigeration, air conditioning, and 10 torpedo tubes. But submarines have personalities, and Affray had one of her own. Sailors remembered her as a boat with a few habits that required watching. Nothing dangerous, nothing that kept her tied to a dockyard wall, but the sort of low level quirks that engineering crews never forgot. During earlier trials, her battery had flooded without warning. On another occasion, she returned from an exercise on a single working engine. She'd twice needed dockyard attention overseas, once in Australia for supercharger problems, and again in Singapore for a partial refit. None of these issues made her unseaworthy on their own, but they added texture to her reputation. Her snort mast, fitted in 1950, had also developed faults early on. Now, this is an important fact, as we'll see later. Again, the Navy addressed each problem as it arose, and officially she was cleared as ready for duty. Her captain trusted her, the service trusted her. Even so, that reputation lingered quietly in the background. Because when a boat disappears as completely as Affray did, without debris, without oil, without a single sign on the surface, people start going back through everything they ever knew about the vessel, searching for meaning in places that once seemed too small to matter. Affray's quirks didn't cause her loss, but in hindsight, they definitely cast a long shadow. As the search continued, more signals drifted through the coastal radio rooms. Faint pulses and broken patterns. Nothing clear enough to act on, but nothing that could be dismissed either. The channel is notorious for bending and reflecting transmissions, making it an unpredictable place for radio operators. Then the tapping returned. It was heard by the search submarines, the HMS Scythian, Sea Devil, and the Sirdar. And the most unsettling of all, HMS Ambush, whose operators believed they heard a clear Morse reading, a message no submarine crew ever wants to send. Trapped on the bottom. The Admiralty dismissed the message as likely originating from another source, but to the men who heard it, the moment stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Standard rescue procedures continued. Explosive charges were dropped into the water. The deliberate, unmistakable signal: "We're here. If you can escape, we'll find you." But nothing rose, and the window for survival quietly closed. Affray was no longer a rescue case. She'd become a mystery. Nearly 2 months after Affray vanished, the search shifted south into deeper water. This is where the seabed fell away into Hurd Deep, a trench with steep sides and a reputation for hiding shipwrecks. When the frigate HMS Loch Fyne picked up a new contact, no one knew whether it was meaningful. The channel floor in that region is crowded with wartime debris, but something about this contact felt different. The shape, the reflection, the way it sat. HMS Reclaim arrived with an underwater television camera. The images were murky at first, flickering through the drifting silt. Then something solid emerged, a handrail, the curve of a casing, and finally the name itself, Affray. She lay upright on the seabed, bow angled down as though she'd tried to rise and failed. The stern lifted slightly behind her, holding the moment in place. Divers reached her in exceptionally difficult conditions. They found no collision marks, no evidence of internal explosion. The hatches were sealed, the escape systems unused, the oxygen candles still in place. Everything about the scene suggested that whatever had happened had been sudden and overwhelming. And then they saw the snort mast. It had snapped off cleanly and lay beside the wreck, held to the casing by a thin twist of metal. Later testing revealed that the steel and welding could become brittle under certain stresses. A sudden failure in that system could have poured water into the induction line faster than anyone on board could react. It was the closest thing the investigation ever found to a cause, but it didn't answer every question. When the Board of Inquiry convened, they faced a wreck that offered almost no clues. The hull was intact. The crew had made no move to escape. The emergency systems were untouched. So they focused on the one detail that did stand out: a snort mast broken cleanly above the casing. Their conclusion was stark. Affray had been snorting when the mast failed, flooding the induction system and overwhelming the crew before they had time to really understand what was happening. In their reconstruction, the entire disaster played out in mere seconds. But inside the Admiralty, the explanation didn't sit comfortably with everyone. The Director of Naval Construction argued that even a flawed mast shouldn't have failed under normal operating conditions. His department suggested other possibilities: mechanical shock, battery related incident, something internal that could have triggered the chain of events. They weren't challenging the board for the sake of it. They simply believed the evidence didn't fully support a single tidy answer. The disagreement exposed something deeper: the limits of what anyone could know. When the files were released, decades later under the 30-year rule, some families felt the inquiry hadn't explored every possibility. It remains clear from the declassified documents that there's no evidence of a deliberate cover up, but the closed nature of the inquiry left enough unanswered points for doubt to take hold. Affray became a case where the official explanation and the technical uncertainties existed side by side, never fully aligning. 75 men were aboard Affray when she sailed, each with a family waiting for news that never came. Most were in their 20s. Families gathered in Portsmouth and along the coast, waiting for updates through days that stretched unbearably long. Tragically, some people even received letters that had been written before the exercise began, arriving after hope had already faded for them. The Navy briefly considered raising the submarine, but the depth, the unstable seabed, and the dangers to divers made it impossible. Affray was declared a war grave. In 2012, a memorial was unveiled on Alderney, the closest land to where she lies. Families stood together decades after the loss, speaking names that had lived in silence for more than 60 years. It's the quietest part of this story, but it's the part that matters most. I've actually included a link to a page that has all the names of the men who were lost, and it's worth taking a look at. HMS Affray remains the last Royal Navy submarine lost at sea, and there's something unsettling about the way her story ends. She didn't break apart, she didn't scatter debris, she simply slipped into the deep. When divers reached her, they found a boat that looked as if it had been frozen in the middle of the last one attempt to rise. The fractured snort mast offered a theory, but not a certainty. And even the Board of Inquiry, with all its technical expertise, could never close the file completely. The tapping heard during the search, the strange signals drifting through the static, the promising contacts that dissolved into nothing, all of it sits just beyond the edges of a neat explanation. It's one reason people still compare her to a modern Maori Celeste. I'd love to hear what you think of this story in the comments below. I really read every single one of them. And if you liked this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Even consider joining as a channel member. I'll see you next time.